Okay, so you do have um, a couple pre-recorded lectures on EMDR and our exercise and things like that. But I wanted to talk about um, something that's not covered in the book and that I feel is pretty important because I needed to figure out a way to help myself. And this is how I did it. And so now I share it with students and advisees and people I supervise. So I'll give you a little background. So my first private practice was in a very small town, Chambersburg, PA. It's in central PA. And I I was going to see anybody who needed counseling. I didn't have any population that I felt, called uh, to treat or to help, and so I was pretty open to anybody, uh, and but uh, most of my clients ended up being children who had been abused either psychologically, physically, or sexually. And the other people in my practice were all female. And so most of the male kids and some female kids, uh, but most of the male kids were referred to me. Um, the so I did do play therapy. So I had like a play therapy room, and then I had a regular counseling room with a couch and chairs and things like that. Um, but you don't know why these things happen, why you're in a certain place, or end up specializing in a certain population. Uh, so it was a wonderful practice because I was new, and all of the other people in the practice had been established therapists for quite some time. And every week we had treatment team and supervision, and I just learned an awful lot uh, from these women in the practice. And they were very empathic and patient, and they really took the time with me and each other to talk about every client and what we needed to learn, and they were very helpful. But one thing uh, that I wasn't sure how to deal with was every night after working and listening to the kids talk about uh, the trauma uh, that they had experienced, I would worry about the kids. And, you know, um, so sometimes uh, it was, I would be laying in bed before going to sleep, and, their stories would replay in my mind. But even more so, if they were in, say, foster care, and I was worried that they would be thrown back into an unhealthy or unsafe environment, or if the resources weren't there to help them, if I felt they needed something. So, because so much was out of my control, and it's often out of the control of therapists, um, you know, I had feelings of concern and worry for their well being. And then I had feelings of helplessness because I could help them in therapy, but I could not change their situation. That was not up to me. Now, every now and then, a court would ask for my recommendation, or CYS would ask for my recommendation. And then I felt like I could have a means to help and influence what happened with them positively. Um, but 90% of the time I wasn't asked. Uh, so, um, yeah, so there was, definitely a lot that I was taking home with me, a lot of worry, a lot of this feeling of helplessness. And I knew that if I wasn't able to address that, that it would end up with me burning out or having to change populations or, something like that. I couldn't do that forever. Um, and as time went on, as the cases often became, more serious somehow, um, I knew I had to deal with it in some way. And so I started really exploring different different ways. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is empathy. Um, so everybody in counseling knows what empathy is, but I guess I'd like to be a little more specific with it because a lot of times people confuse empathy with other things. And the first thing they confuse empathy for is sympathy. And empathy is very different than sympathy. Um, Sympathy is when I feel bad or have pity on whatever somebody else is experiencing. Um, but that's very different. Empathy is actually trying to place ourselves in somebody else's shoes so that can come as close as possible to experiencing the feelings that they've experienced. And so I was really into empathy because I was really into person centered and Carl Rogers and his daughter Natalie Rogers. And they're all about accurate empathic understanding and being present for the client. The problem was I did my best to experience what the client was sharing and experience the feelings so that I could accurately identify what they were going through. And I acknowledged if somebody's experienced trauma, there's no way we can come that close to it. So I'm not saying I'm experiencing the same level. I'm just doing my best uh, to have a better empathic understanding of the feelings that the client is experiencing. There's no way I can experience the same thing because I didn't experience that trauma. So, but the problem was I'm being empathic, I'm experiencing these feelings, and then those feelings linger with me, and I'm holding on to those feelings. And so I started reading and talking with different people, and one of the one of the things that really helped me was in a previous degree, I was studying cross-cultural studies and cross-cultural religions, and um, and I was remembering a lot of the things that I was taught uh, in various areas. And so I was um, I was in India and up in this ashram in the Himalayas, and they were teaching me how to meditate. And so every 6 hours, they'd ring this gong, and we'd all get up, whatever we were doing, and go into the meditation room and um, and meditate. And uh, and we were each of us was assigned a monk, and one of I had this great monk. He had to be over 100 years old, and his name was Maria Bhakti. And like, I don't know if you've seen the old Addams Family, but they had a character named Cousin It that just had all this hair. and he had white hair, and it covered like most of him, and and a long white beard and mustache, and he was just so empathic. And I wasn't even planning on being a counselor at that point, but I'm like, I'm telling him, I'm like, I'm sitting there trying to meditate. And if you think about it, every 6 hours, you're getting up in like the middle of the night to go meditate. And 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 I'm telling him I'm having problems, because I start thinking about all this stuff. My mind is cluttered, and I can't think about nothing. And he said, well, why do you think we wear these orange, or as he called it, saffron robes? Why do we wear saffron robes? And I, I had no idea. I thought it was just a different color. Um, and like if you go to Japan and go study Zen Buddhism, there's a community that wears gray robes. And I thought people just wore different colored robes for different reasons. But he said, no, no. And the next morning he took me out, and we were having tea outside, and he's like, look at the mountain ridge. And I'm having tea and I'm looking at this mountain ridge. And he knew that all of the monks were going out to the village to do some type of community volunteer work. They might be helping in some way in the community. But it was a narrow path, it was on the top of a mountain, and they were all in a line. And from a distance, it looked like a line of flames walking across the horizon. And he said, that's why we wear saffron robes, so that from a distance we look like flame. And he says, there's something about flame, it's like it burns bright, it's only there in the present. It can be extinguished with, a breath. And that's life. And he said, when you meditate, I only want you to think about two things. I want you to think about breathing, and I want you to use all of your senses to think about breathing. Like you might smell what we're having for dinner. You might feel the air entering and leaving your nostrils and your body. You might, um, you know, uh, hear the breath entering and exiting your body. So, use all of your senses. Breathe in through your nose, hold it a second, breathe out through your mouth. Do diaphragmatic breathing, so you can feel like if you place your hand on your stomach, um, you can feel it rise and fall. So you're not just breathing with your chest. And imagine how that oxygen makes you feel. And you might start to yawn because when you're experiencing anxiety, you're naturally taking shorter breaths and you're not getting as much oxygen in your body. And so begin meditation by breathing. And if your mind begins to wander, don't worry about it. Everybody's mind wanders. Just remind yourself to breathe again. And if you notice, in the middle of the meditation center, there's a candle. And as you begin to feel comfortable breathing and you learn how to breathe in a rhythmic manner, and your mind begins to get into the habit of thinking about breathing, open your eyes and look at the flame. Notice how it dances. Notice how it flickers, you know. Um, and if you're going to focus on anything, focus on that and breathing. And then I said, okay. He said, well, what are some of the things that are entering your mind? And I had been working with I'd been working at a church with like teenagers, and of course, every teenager has teenager angst or problems in relationships, or they're going to drop out of school. It's a variety of things, and some are more serious than others. And I told him I was worried about these kids I had been working with, and it would make gave me a lot of anxiety and sadness. And I hope that I can help them, when I returned home in some way and the school year began again. And he said, he said, this is when he taught me detachment. So, you know, practice the meditation, practice the breathing, relax, uh, you know, but detachment is often misunderstood. People think detachment is not feeling what other people are feeling, but it's the entire opposite. Detachment is when we fully experience empathy and allow ourselves to feel as much of what whoever we're talking with or present for is feeling. And we allow ourselves to experience those emotions to our fullest extent. And but the thing is, we allow them to flow through us. We remind ourselves that this was not our experience, that we do not own these emotions, that they're not ours. And then we let them go. And that's what detachment is. If we practice detachment the incorrect way, so if we don't allow ourselves to experience any emotion and we separate ourselves from our clients or anybody, then it's like we are building an emotional barrier and we don't experience any accurate empathy. And that's what a lot of counselors end up doing. They detach in a incorrect and unhealthy way. And then it's so clinical, and it's like they're going through steps, and yeah, I'll provide this resource, or they go through kind of a memorized treatment, and it's usually cognitively based. It's usually not feeling based. And so, unfortunately, then people feel dead in their jobs. They don't feel that vitality of being present for another human being. So we have to practice the other type of detachment. And it's an interesting word, because very few people understand that detachment is truly accurate empathic understanding, experiencing all of those emotions to the greatest degree possible, allowing us to feel them. But so as we're feeling those emotions empathically, we are still cognitively assessing those emotions and trying to accurately understand them. So it's twofold. It's feeling and it's understanding. And that's why Carl Rogers calls it accurate empathic understanding. And then reminding ourselves, wow, these are powerful emotions. I'm glad I was able to be present for you and share to whatever degree possible in those emotions. But it's not my experience, and I am going to release them now, and I'm not going to hold on to them or take them home. So that's how I experience accurate empathic understanding, but I don't hold on to those emotions. And that doesn't mean I still don't worry, you know, about clients or, but I try to do my best. Um, it's very different not owning those emotions. It also helps us when we come into conflict interacting. with human beings. Not even clients, or maybe a client that's projecting something emotional onto us, or perhaps they have a negative reaction, or they come into a session angry or upset. Um, and, you know, people are not experienced the same way counselors are. And sometimes people get angry with us. Sometimes people uh, blame us for whatever. Um, and the first thing we have to remind ourselves of is that that's about them. I don't need to own that emotion. And so this helps me out all the time, especially with kids and my own kids. And I'm not going to say my wife or I'll get in trouble. She's an LPC too, and she says, "Don't try that counseling stuff on me. I know what you're doing." So, um, but really, so the first thing is to recognize that they're experiencing negative emotions, whatever they might be, and that them projecting those emotions onto us or into a session or just into a conversation, uh, that's not about me. And so as soon as I can say that and not get drawn in personally, because that's really the reason for the projection of that emotion, is to draw us in. It's to make, so let's say somebody's angry, uh, you know, maybe I didn't run the dishwasher or whatever. They get up, there's nothing, no silverware or anything to use, and they're angry at me. And, I realized that I'd made a mistake, but um, you know, I think I think it's more like when people are upset about something with somebody else, they project an emotion that will result in the other people experiencing the emotion that they are feeling. So if I'm angry, I feel like Um, there's an underlying emotion to anger. It could be maybe I felt like, oh, I'm angry because somebody didn't do their share of the work and now I'm stuck and I'm going to be late for work, or maybe I've been treated unjustly, or maybe I've been betrayed in some way. And so when I meet that other person and I express that anger, which is really a secondary emotion resulting from one of those key underlying emotions, the unconscious reason that I'm expressing that anger towards the other person is ultimately that I want them to experience the same feeling that I'm experiencing. And so you get in an argument because you're both experiencing negative feelings. But let's go about this another way. Uh, Somebody comes and they're angry, and it could be any emotion. I'm just using anger as an example. And they're angry about something. If I don't own that emotion, I realize that emotion's about them. Then I can use detachment. I can empathically experience the frustration, the underlying emotions that they're experiencing. And then I can react empathically instead of being drawn into an argument. And so simply expressing that I understand what they're experiencing. And I'm not going to say I understand what you're experiencing. I'm going to share the emotions. Wow, I'm sorry you're angry. I I imagine you're feeling, frustrated because you're doing more share of the household work than I am, and it may result in you being late for your outside job. So just the acknowledgement of what the actual emotion is, and that, yes, I do understand without saying I understand because I'm sharing the empathic response. That de escalates that initial emotion and it takes the other person to a deeper level of conversation and dialogue. So you're no longer dealing with anger, you're dealing with understanding, with the deeper emotion, and then resulting in how can I make amends or help you so that you're not late. And so, you know, it's the same thing in any type of counseling. I just use that as an example. But not owning the emotion, reminding ourselves, then trying to empathically understand using detachment, not holding on to that emotion after we try our best to experience it, but cognitively trying to understand where that emotion is coming from. So we have accurate empathic understanding. And then responding empathically, which means responding emotionally, uh, not just saying we understand. And then trying to process and resolve whatever that emotion is at a deeper level rather than a surface level. So that's detachment and empathy. And before we go on to um, becoming the observer, any responses, questions, examples? Go ahead.
So you said work with children. Was that, I just feel like that'd be so hard to like just leave at work and then like come home without that. Was that something you had to practice or did you already just learn that skill and then?
Um, so uh yeah, it just so happened that I was working with a lot of kids because I was the one who took kids. But I worked with some other adults too, but it was the kids that got to me, like you said. But what I just explained, I didn't learn in counseling, you know. Uh and I had to figure out some way so that I wasn't taking all those emotions home or that worry home. And so I just kind of searched what can I'm thinking, what can I do, you know, so that I don't get burned out and so that I can be a good counselor because a burnt out counselor is not going to be a good counselor. Or I would have end up detaching in an unhealthy way and not experiencing those emotions, kind of shutting myself off. And so I just happened to remember, what I had learned from like years before and it worked, you know. And now it is in counseling books, not that I wrote it, but you know, other people discover the same things. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about becoming the observer. And so uh, when we talk about that cognitive component of um, understanding emotions empathically. So detachment, yeah, we're feeling those emotions and letting them go. Uh, but there's that cognitive part. How do I understand this emotion cognitively? And so becoming the observer is much more difficult to explain. Um, so becoming the observer is almost the opposite of detachment. So the healthy form of detachment is allowing ourselves to fully experience those emotions, let them run through us, and to let them go. Whereas detachment is in the cognitive realm. And detachment is the best way I can describe it is, and this is from Zen Buddhism. It's imagining yourself like above yourself and watching yourself. So it's just kind of this mental trick. You're not actually like floating someplace in some other dimension, but you're imagining yourself somewhere above you watching yourself. And what you're able to do then is to experience the emotions on a feeling level and an emotional level, but then to also use your cognitive ability to observe yourself. So as I'm experiencing these emotions, I might become tearful emotionally. I might, um, feel a lot of different things. But observing myself and what I'm experiencing, I'm taking a mental note. Wow, Grafton, you're experiencing, uh, you know, um, I'll just try to think of an example. Um, you're experiencing a sense of abandonment and helplessness and pain and, uh, this loss of innocence and fear. And so I'm acknowledging cognitively the emotions I'm experiencing emotionally. And so what that's doing is it's giving me those two parts of myself. It's giving me the emotional part and the cognitive part. And that cognitive part later allows me to look back on it, and it allows me to decide how I want to treat, you know, this client or patient in the future of the sessions. So it allows me to better identify the experience, the symptoms, the trauma, how it's being expressed through various diagnostic criteria. Um, and if I can identify symptomology accurately, then I can come up with a better comprehensive treatment plan to help that client. And yeah, so after after all that, like when I have 10 or 15 minutes to write notes, I can put the emotional part and the cognitive part together and then say, okay, this is what I've learned. And what am I going to do about it? Uh, so if I was this client, how would I how would I want to be helped? What would best meet my needs? So it's coming up with a treatment plan, but having a better understanding of what the client's needs truly are. It also helps me to identify DSM criteria and symptomology accurately. So, for example, I might have been referred a client who has severe anxiety, some phobia, panic attacks, uh, maybe some bipolar or ADHD. But as I experience all this, I realize that it's all symptomology from trauma and PTSD. So, I think it gives us a better assessment, which leads to a better treatment program. The other thing that happens with becoming the observer, separate from empathy and detachment, is if I'm feeling emotional about something, and maybe it has to do with the session or not, Um, but maybe I don't want to experience those feelings because I don't think it's going to be um, healthy in treatment. So, you know, maybe a loved one just died. Well, that means I'm grieving. but I don't want to experience my own grieving in the session with the client. And it's okay to put grieving on hold when I'm in a session. It doesn't mean I won't go back to grieving when I'm not in a session, but it could be anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be the observer again. And I'm going to think about what I'm going to say from an external cognitive perspective. And that doesn't mean I'm not empathic or anything else. It simply means that I'm going to take myself away from emotions that I don't want to bring to the session. And I'm going to focus on appropriate empathic emotions with the client. It helps one focus on the client and be present for the client without dealing with my own issues in the session. And so, I think that um, all of these different things kind of have their purpose in the session. Um, what have other people experienced? You know, maybe you have some experience in the field, maybe in practicum or something else. Um, have you found ways? So when we talk about self-care in counseling, you have no idea uh, how many times people say just kind of things that they like to do that makes them feel better. And I'm not discounting that, but true self care needs to be a specific way to deal with baggage that we pick up from our clients or from sessions. And so I think it's a little more detailed than going for a walk, which is nice. I love going for walks. It helps me to relax. Or, whatever our enjoyment is, it has to be a little more focused than that, and preventive. And then I would think the last thing is that no matter what, even if we're being empathic and have accurate empathic understanding and trying detachment and becoming the observer, then bringing together that emotional and cognitive side, then coming up with an appropriate treatment plan. Even with all that, we're still going to get stressed out and we're still going to worry about clients. And what do we do then? And that's why supervision never ends, because we process that in supervision, in treatment teams, in supervision with other professionals. I remember one time uh, I had worked with this friend of mine, Jeff Samid. He was a professor here. I'd worked with him for almost 20 years, and he was going to retire. And before he left, we spent an entire afternoon sharing the worst things that we had experienced. Um, and because we never get to share those things with other people. And I'm talking like, people who have experienced shootings and murders and horrible things, you um, all kinds of traumatic things. But it's rare that we really get to talk about those things with somebody else. And but we should be talking about those things every week as they happen, you know. Um, and I'm sure I did, probably not enough, probably not to the extent I needed to. So that became kind of like a processing experience. But we should do that every week. Just because you get an LPC doesn't mean you shouldn't maintain supervision, even if it's peer supervision between you and another LPC. You can do that free for each other. You don't have to pay for supervision. You find another LPC and you do supervision for each other for free. Then you both get it for free, and you learn a lot from that other person, and hopefully they learn something from you. All right, well, tell me a little bit about, has anybody found other ways? This is not the only way. Has anybody found other ways to deal with, you know, anxiety resulting from sessions or clients or whatever it might be?
I know, I mean, I've seen a therapist for years off and on, and even before I went into this program, I sought out therapy for a different reason, but as I started to consider going back to school, like I started processing that with her. I'm like, do you think that, I mean, for lack of better terms, I said, do you think that I'm, you know, not screwed up enough to actually do this? Like I don't want to harm anyone else, with all of my stuff, and I want to make sure like I'm making an okay decision. So, like even though she's not like my supervisor per se, like we check in with that quite often.
Yeah, so that's a great thing that I didn't mention, you know? Uh, every therapist needs a therapist, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And, you know, I think at different times in our lives, we might realize, oh, I'm like maybe projecting an emotion or feeling some kind of countertransference. And that just means, oh, some unfinished business has cropped up and I need to deal with that. What else? Anybody else?
Well, I think therapy or mental health sometimes have like a stigma that you just look for help or counseling because you have an issue or a problem. Uh, but that is also part of self-care. So we as counselors need to have it like a habit. Like when you apply your shot yearly for flu or whatever shots you get, it's like constant like maintenance and self-care. So is going more in depth, and you go to yourself as much as you want to, and or as much as you want to confront yourself. So it's like it's never ending. Is
It's
I think
never
it's a never
ending. That's
ending
right.
journey.
And that's because our growth is never over. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that when you're talking to somebody and you're kind of empathizing, carrying that baggage, I think the intensity of ebbs and flows as you're sitting there and you have those emotions.
So not me, you.
Yes.
So as I.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. But like as that emotion is going, I'd like to after I've talked to somebody or done something, I'd write down like what that felt, and then later on go back and read it and ask myself like, did that? Am I holding on to that now? Did I connect to that differently? Is there
Sure.
something going on with me, or is that something that I'm just holding on to because I'm not able to detach from that emotion?
So sometimes maybe journaling, writing about what you're experiencing, letting it sit, and then coming back to it at a later time and re-examining it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
If I don't write stuff down, I won't hold myself accountable for things.
Yeah.
So what should myself, and that's why like I make sure to write it down because I talk about it.
Yeah. So she's saying that combination of journaling and then maybe even bringing that journal to therapy so you don't forget things, and that process of writing it down is therapeutic. Yeah. All right. Well, there's another lecture online and an exercise that I hope you'll enjoy. So, all right. We'll all see you next week. Next week, we'll go over the psychological thing. All right. We'll see you later.
Well, I have a quick question, really
Yeah.
quick. The suicide assessment assignment has like a 1 to 2 page paper, but there's, as far as I could see, I couldn't find a description of the paper that we were supposed to
What are we
write for
gonna
it.
do with that?
Description of like what happened, like it
Yeah, it's just a description of what you did in the video.
Oh, sorry. Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Perfect.
that's it. Yeah,
Thanks.
well, don't complicate it, yeah. All right.